And so freedom is already free. Freedom is already free. And so there is nothing that needs to be done for freedom to be free. It is just about recognizing that you are freedom that is already free, and not the person, the mind, and the story. It is remembering the freedom that is already here and that is already free. And we open to this remembering through recognizing in this present moment there is a presence that is unwavering, still and silent, that never changes and has never changed. And this unchanging presence that is silent, still being is the freedom that is already free. That there is nothing for the mind to understand. There's no doing, there's no process in the future. It's about this moment here now, the open, awake recognition, remembering of being that which is already free. Being freedom, being the being. And that it is not a doing in any way, that there is nothing to understand, nothing to get. And really, it is about just allowing the mind to do whatever it is doing and being completely unconcerned, and recognizing that that which is unconcerned is the impersonal freedom, the awareness that is aware of the moving, changing, is already free. And it is recognizing and remembering that you are the awareness, the observer, the seer, the silent experiencer, but you're not the experience. You're not the moving, changing experience. This is the fundamental recognition that brings the remembering of freedom. There is absolutely nothing that the me can do, the mind or the person can do, because in truth, the mind, the me, the person does not exist as a separate entity. However strongly there is a belief in that separate existence, it is not truth. And the invitation is a constant, open possibility to see through the identification, to see through the belief in being the person that is separate, divided, and that has a story, to the immediate and spontaneous recognition that who you are in truth is not who you have thought you were, that who you are in truth is the silent, still, awake awareness. Where there is struggle, where there is suffering, it's because the mind is suffering itself, right? The mind is suffering its own experience. The mind is suffering its own thinking. That is all that's happening. So when the awareness can be aware of the mind that is struggling, challenged, and suffering, there can be the immediate spontaneous recognition in this moment, here now, that who you are is not in struggle, not in challenge, not in overwhelm. And it matters not what the mind thinks it knows or understands or has learnt, or even what it has known through its perception of experience. It's all completely irrelevant. The only relevance is the immediate, spontaneous recognition in this moment, which is ever fresh. It's an ever fresh, ever present recognition. It's never held onto, it's never in time, it cannot be grasped, it cannot be understood by the mind, and in absolute truth, it cannot be spoken of, it cannot be put into words. The direct experience of the being simply being just is. It's the recognition that you can look and look and look with the mind for this truth. You will not find it until you realize that you already are it. This is the great recognition, is that you already are what you are looking for. You already are the freedom that is free. And it is this attunement to a resonance, a fine resonance, which is the presence of being that is always here, never moving and changing, underneath the play of the moving changing. Now the moving changing is a flow of grace, it's a flow of life. And there's much to be gleaned in the flow of life, being the flow of life, but not until you know the being that you are. Because if you don't know the being that you are, you're identified as a someone in the flow of life. And even though you can meet the feelings that come up and you can, in a certain way, witness what's happening in life, if you don't know the silent being that you are, and you haven't seen through the identification with the personal and the limited, then the process of refinement it's happening, but it's more challenging, because if the identification is in place, the perspective of seeing is still the perspective of a victim on some level. And now it's okay, right? Every being is exactly where they are. And where every being is already an intrinsic part of the whole. It's all perfect. It may not seem perfect to the mind, but we're not speaking about what the mind thinks. And we really have to come to a point, a presence, this moment, the presence of this moment, where we stop reporting and being concerned about what the mind says, because only the mind is concerned about what the mind says, right? And the grace is that in this moment, the being that is already free, that you already are in truth, is here. And it's to use this reference, this ability to reference the still silent being, to check indirect experience in the moment, what is happening in the being, and be only concerned about what is happening in the being, being the seer, the observer of the moving changing, and not being identified in the moving changing. This is the game changer. It's the game over, right? Because when we come to recognize the being that is not moving and changing, we have this capacity to rest here, even though during the refinement, there is a sense of going backwards and forwards. You're actually not going backwards and forwards. You're resting in the knowing of the being, and the mind, the residual habit of the mind is popping up. Now you cannot measure with the mind. Well, where am I? Am I in the awakeness? Am I the being? You know, when this truth is known, you don't need to question it. It's so clear. It's so clear when you're in the being. It's so clear. So it's always the mind that's questioning. It's the mind that's questioning. Now you can have these moments of opening and clarity, And in the moment of opening and clarity, it's so clear, it's without doubt that you are the being. But until it has really deeply rooted and anchored, and the perspective has really fully shifted, then the sense of being able to go backwards and forwards can still be in place. Now, where there can be speak of awakening, this word is used so differently in the play of the world and spirituality that it's just to realize, if you try to understand with the mind and you try to measure with the mind, you're going to tie yourself in knots, because so too does the mind want this. The mind wants this, and it has studied this to some capacity, or maybe to a great capacity. But all of that knowledge is completely irrelevant. What the mind knows is not truth. The truth is this moment, ever fresh, ever present. And so if you're in a moment of doubting, don't spend time doubting and wondering. Just let go and be here, and recognize in the felt sense of being, there is no doubt. So right now, just be the being. When we speak about the sincerity and the commitment, in a way, the mind can take hold of this idea, and it wants to be sincere. It wants to be committed. It wants to want only this, because it wants. But it's not in that wanting that freedom is. It's to translate that wanting to a felt sense of longing. It's to shift from the mind to the heart. And we shift from the mind to the heart, and the mind's wanting to the heart's longing. We shift through the felt sense, through being able to feel the longing, because we need this felt sense to be very alive and recognizable, because it is so too this felt sense that brings us to recognize the resonance of being, the aliveness of presence. So we shift desire, wanting, to the felt sense of the longing of the heart, the felt sense of being in love with truth, in love with God, in love with this pull, in love with satsang, in love with the divine, without really being able to understand what that is. There's an aliveness in the heart that is just such a pull, such a draw. And it's to come to this, because in a way, this is to take off the cloak of the mind's desire and the mind's well-intentioned sincerity, but to come to the true sincerity. It's like we have to just take off the burden. And we can take off this burden through coming to the felt sense of the longing. And when we come to the felt sense of the longing, we're immediately brought to presence. And presence is now. Presence is just this moment as it is. Presence is being. So we can't understand what is being spoken here with the mind, although because it's a language that the mind understands, the mind will try. But the mind's habit is to conceptualize everything, to create ideas and beliefs out of everything. And so it's okay. It's the way that functioning works. It's not a problem. It's not an enemy. We don't have to do anything about the mind. We don't have to stop the mind. We don't have to train the mind. We don't have to do anything with the mind. The mind is naturally tamed, let's say, when we rest in the being. In a way, this process is about coming to the remembrance of the being that is free and awake and aware of the mind, and recognizing that in the face of the mind's habitual patterning to keep on bringing up conditioned ideas, beliefs, protections, it's that in the being, we have the capacity to watch the mind, be aware of the mind, remain as the unmoving presence, whatever is happening in the mind. That as soon as we leave the presence to narrate what the mind is up to, we're in the mind and an interceptor has snuck in to pull the attention away. So it's to recognize that it just doesn't matter what's happening in the mind. And the less of that story we can tell, the less of that interceptor reporting that happens, the more we can rest in the freedom. Now, it's such a habit that it will pop up. It will pop up, and it's okay, because when it pops up, we use it as an opportunity to be aware and see what it's reporting, but to recognize, if you listen to the mind and believe the mind, it's because you're identified in the mind and you're cycling in that cycle of the personal and the limited. As soon as there's awareness of that, it's to be the awareness that's aware of being aware of the mind, and to recognize, is the awareness disturbed or affected by whatever's happening in the mind, however stormy it seems, however struggling or suffering or overwhelmed it seems? Is the being touched? And to confirm in the direct experience, no. Of course, it has to be confirmed in the direct experience. So the confirming in the direct experience pulls the attention away from the habit of attention to be with the mind and the moving. The checking and confirming pulls the attention to the being, to the presence, to the consciousness, to the awake field. And once the attention shifts, when we keep exploring with certain kinds of inquiry, like, is the being disturbed? Right? Attention looks within the being and says, no. Does the being have a problem? Attention looks within and finds no. Starts to recognize a certain depth of stillness, a certain silence, and a quality of beingness. Awareness can watch the mind, the moving, changing, the body, again, moving, changing, the sense perceptions that are moving and changing, and the surface experience that's moving and changing. And the witnessing awareness can see all of this, can see the moving, changing. And so, if you are aware of the moving, changing, can you notice that you are not the moving, changing? So again, attention comes to the stillness and attention checks within the direct experience and confirms the independence from the moving, changing. Well, no, I'm not that. I'm aware of it, and I'm not that. So it's to notice then that the being itself doesn't think, it doesn't bring questions forward. It's just here now. Can you notice that the being, this presence, has always been here? Has it ever gone anywhere, this presence? In the direct felt sense, has it gone anywhere? Does it ever move and change? And so again, the attention is invited to look within the presence, to look within the consciousness. And really, this is the consciousness, consciously being aware of itself and exploring itself. And as the investigation, which is really true inquiry, is happening, attention is being pulled to rest more deeply in the being. Attention is the attention of awareness. It's awareness being aware. But when awareness's attention is identified with the moving and changing, it creates a limitation, a sense of limitation within the unlimited. And so it's to notice then that as attention is resting as the being, the openness, can attention, the aware attention, recognize here now in the being, in the direct experience, are there any edges? Are there any bounds here? In the felt sense of being, this aware presence, can awareness check, are there any edges? If you find an edge, explore the edge, come right to the edge and find out again, what is this edge made of? If you meet a boundary, what is the boundary made of? Feel the substance, feel the sensation, feel the aliveness. If there's a sense that the mind comes in, it's just to notice, oh, thinking is happening. Be aware of thinking happening and start again. Be the awareness, aware of the thinking. See the thinking. See the thoughts that come and go. They're moving and changing. Can you recognize that as the awareness of the thoughts, that you're not touched by the thoughts? You're not disturbed in any way. As the awareness, you're just simple and still and open. So this inquiry is the true inquiry. And this is really the only way to see through the mind's habit to circle within itself, to think about itself, to narrate its experience, and to constantly chatter with itself. So the only way to come to this remembering is through the immediacy of the moment. So we can speak too about the resonance. And the resonance that we speak of is really the aliveness of the presence. And as we open to feel the aliveness of the presence, we recognize this resonance or a frequency or vibration. The words don't really matter, but we play with words so that every being can attune with a word that is recognized as a resonance. And so coming to the being, coming to the presence of now, it's coming to a resonance. It's a silent resonance, because the resonance in truth is light. And so it's coming to the lightness of being, coming to the resonance, and just being here in the finer frequency of being. And as we come to the being and we rest here, we start to become more and more familiar with how this feels, what this is, and really familiar with the sense of freedom, familiar with the sense of openness. We start to feel a really wonderful relaxation, because attention itself is resting. And when attention is resting, awareness is resting in itself. So we're really starting to feel the sense of the self being itself, resting in itself, being the being. You're starting to feel your own true presence, your own true beingness. And of course, the mind can imagine that what is being looked for is going to be discovering something that's new, that's different. And this can be a trip, because what is being discovered is so intimate, so close. It's who you've always been. It's what you've always been. So the discovery of yourself is really the recognition that your true self, the being, the true being, the consciousness, is the felt sense of yourself, exactly as you have always known it. But it's coming into an intimacy with yourself. And it's an intimacy of who are you and how do you feel when you're not focused upon the story? Who are you and how do you feel when you're here just as the presence and attention is resting within itself? You feel exactly the same on a certain level. You feel the same as you've always felt. It's so familiar to know yourself. And in a way, there's a sense of the body is still here. You can still feel the body. It's just that the felt sense, when you really open to the aliveness, you start to notice that the felt sense, the resonance, isn't only in the body, although you can feel it in the body. And as we open to this, the aliveness of the recognition will possibly bring a greater aliveness of sensation in the body. It might bring more of a sense of a flow, of a pulsing, almost like being alive, being more energized, being more vibrating. But really, what's important is the actual frequency or the vibration. And as you really start to feel this, you feel that it's not actually inside the skin and the bones, but that it's vibrating everywhere, it's alive everywhere, that it doesn't really have any boundaries. It's not inside and it's not outside. You can't really measure or figure out where it is. But the immediacy of the felt sense of it is so obvious, and it feels like yourself. It feels like the self that you've always known. And we could say here that the self that you feel like is the self that you've always been since you were a child. That this has always been here. It's the self that you've always been underneath the story. And the story is just the mind consciousness functioning and being identified with itself. And the mind consciousness functioning and being identified with itself keeps alive through this tension, and this tension of thinking and believing. It keeps the story alive. Now, the curious thing is we get given this story. We come into the human birth completely free and open, and we have the story of division and separation projected onto us, and we start believing it. So the mind can have a field day with that. Well, what's the point in that? What a load of nonsense. What is God up to? Right? But we don't get involved in the mind's disbelief or concern or upset about this. But we get this idea of conditioned separation projected upon us. This is your name. This is your house. These are your toys. These are your siblings. These are your parents or guardians, right? This is called this. This is called a tree. This is called a dog. This is called a flower. This is your dinner, right? And as you move in the experience, we're taught, we're conditioned to identify within the mind. But at the same time, this presence of being is always here. Let's say it's been our constant companion. And each being will have a certain remembrance of this, some more strongly than others, but the remembrance of this truth is here. And it's the remembrance of this truth that actually brings alive the sense of seeking. Because within the human condition and the condition that we're taught to think and identify with the person and live within this limited functioning and story and narrative, that within this, there's also a sense of something missing, something lacking. And there's a beauty to this. But the curiosity is that there's a great misunderstanding that the sense of something missing or something lacking or not being enough, it is causing us to seek what is enough, what is full, what is true. And that will come in various flavors for each being. It will bring a feeling of wanting to find a sense of wholeness, a sense of purity that might feel like, or a sense of innocence, a sense of openness, or it might just be a direct line. I want to know God, right? I want freedom. I want love, right? It can come in. I want to be happy. I want to just be always happy. Whatever way this comes in, it's actually the true impulse to know and remember and really live as yourself, the self that you know that you are, and to not be living in this conditioned identification and this whirling story. And yet what happens is that the misunderstanding is that we can find this fulfillment in the world of things, in the world of experience, where the truth is that we cannot find the ultimate fulfillment in limitation, right? Even this is, to a certain degree, has to be obvious to the mind, but it doesn't even matter if it's obvious to the mind, because the mind is a limited context. And so it can theorize or conceptualize this, but it's really what's important is that as these words come, there's the mind activity happening in the conceptualizing and the attempting to understand, which is the natural functioning of mind consciousness, and it's okay. But simultaneously, the consciousness itself is hearing itself at a finer frequency and attuning to itself at the finer frequency. So it's like there's this mind consciousness at a denser vibration that's whirring and buzzing and trying to understand within the limited context. And simultaneously, the consciousness, which is unlimited, but the consciousness has got identified on the mind level. So that mind level is whirring, but on a deeper level, the part of you that already knows is whirring away at a finer frequency, recognizing itself and attuning to the alive recognition. And this is unseen and not understandable by the mind, but it will start to bring a felt sense of more relaxation, a felt sense of recognition, a felt sense of, oh, okay, right? An ability to notice your own beingness, an ability to notice a softening, an opening, a kind of a clarity, even a happiness, right? It doesn't really matter, but this starts to just come all by itself. Now, the habituated mind, because you feel this is happening in the frequency of consciousness. It's all part of the same direct experience. And so in the felt sense of it, the mind then says, oh, okay, this is what's happening. I think I'm onto something here. It doesn't really matter what the mind is doing, but it's to recognize that the mind will try to co-opt the direct experience. And as soon as the mind pulls the attention away, you're away from this. And so what can happen is that you're opening and you can feel the felt sense. You can feel the felt sense, and it's boundless and free. It's your being. It's the being, the one being that we all share. And you can feel the relaxation and the openness. And according to the depth of the being that has been recognized, could feel very deep and peaceful, or it could feel very alive and flowing. It doesn't really matter, because the deep peace usually comes first, but not always. But the deep peace, the stillness, the silence, at some point, the deep peace and silence in the knowing of itself will start to come alive within its knowing, right? The knowing is what comes alive. Now, for some beings, there can be more of an aliveness, like in a way, it's not a rule, but more of a bhakti kind of being might have more of an aliveness of the longing of the heart, more of a devotion, right? There can be just more of a felt sense, but it's not a rule. So don't conceptualize this, but there can be more of an aliveness of the longing that's what calls you into the resonance. And it's the aliveness that you feel, that you just feel so alive with this longing, like you just want to fall on the floor with your head at the feet of life, right? It can be more of this kind of feeling of just take me, just take me into you, just bring me all the way. You know, it can be really like a deep feeling of an aliveness. But as this alive longing, it comes to more of a sense of freedom and presence, you will feel the peace and the stillness in the heart of the longing. You'll feel the presence and the aliveness. And so it's never to be using the mind as a measure of, have I got the peace or have I got the aliveness? Is it right or it's wrong? Am I there? All of that, it's just to be aware, oh, that's the mind. The mind doesn't know. Just be here in the beingness. Here's the freedom. Does the freedom need to know whether it's the peace or the aliveness, right? Let the attention of awareness check. Awareness is just aware. It's aware of the moving, changing when it kind of points outwards, and it's aware of itself just being when it points inwards. And really, we're inviting the attention of awareness to point inwards, because when the attention of awareness points inwards, it points to itself, and you start to feel who you really are. You start to feel what you is, and what you is the I. You is a wonderful word. It has absolutely no meaning in truth. It only is a word that one can use to point to you, right? You never use that, the word you, right? It's kind of you is a word which is the presence of being. In truth, you, who you truly are, is an invitation to the I to recognize its I-ness, right? Now, the word you is a glorious marker, because if when the word you comes, you receive that pointing as a me, it shows you where you are, right? It shows you. Let's say you is the I am presence. That's why it's such an extraordinary, it's extraordinary to ponder just you, the sound, the resonance of you, ooh, right? Hey, you, yes, you, consciousness, right? Yes, you, who, you, who, you, who are you? Who are you? Right? It's this wonderful opportunity to recognize that you doesn't have any meaning, but it shows you who you are. It shows you the incredible freedom that you are as the being. And it also gives an opportunity to point that if the pointing feels like, who, me? There's the answer. No, not that one. You. Me? No. You. Me? No, no, no. You. You consciousness. Find out. Find out who you are. This is really speaking to the I, right? So as these words come, we're kind of joking here, because there's a really big cosmic joke going on here, right? You think you're the mind and body? No, no, no. You are pure, innocent, divine being. What are you up to? Playing at being identified with the mind body. Find out who you are and be free, right? Consciousness speaking to itself. So we've co-opted in the mind the words I and you, and we've identified them with the mind and the body. But when we really come to the felt sense of being, we start to be able to play like this and feel the joke. We start to feel the joke. We feel the joke when we see through the misunderstanding. Now, the mind too is waiting for a big kahuna, a big bang moment where it's all going to collapse. Something new and divine is going to be realized. And of course, this is never going to happen. So where the mind has conceptualized what awakening is, and it's waiting for something, and it's acting as the authority based on its concepts, it means that this presence, this profound presence of being, can be constantly overlooked because the mind is saying, oh no, I'm in the mind, right? It's such a cunning little trickster. It says, oh no, I'm in the mind, so I'm not in the awake being. So yes, that is the mind. The mind's measuring everything. Oh, you're not in the being. You are not in the being. It's the mind speaking to itself. So this is why the only way out of the mind speaking to itself, suffering its own experience, is to come to the presence of being and be aware of the mind. Be aware of the moving, changing. Be aware of the thoughts that are coming and going. Be aware of the tensions. Be aware of sense perception. Be aware of a sense of separation or division. Be aware of who you are, right? Know yourself. To know yourself is to know the self that you are in truth, which is the I am presence of being, which is shared with the divine. The I am presence is the same presence, the same I am presence of the divine. And the invitation of the moment, the one moment here now, is to remember yourself in the I am presence of being and to feel the unlimited openness and freedom of being yourself. That the mind can wax lyrical on and on and on and on about itself. It can go on and on and on about a lot of things. And it doesn't matter. Let it go on. Because the more that you are just aware of it as the being that's watching, the consciousness that is mind consciousness naturally relaxes. There's no doing involved. There's no action involved. It's just that the consciousness that is the essence of the mind consciousness remembers its true nature and relaxes. And then there's this sense of a harmonious being that you are. And in this moment, you're the awake field. You're not someone who's awake. You're not Bob or Joe or Sally who's awake. You're the awake field. You're awakeness itself, right? So you never take ownership. You're never like, oh yeah, I had an awakening. No, because now you're someone that's sharing their experience. Be the awake field. As the awake field, you're just here now, shining, radiant openness. Yes, you can speak about the being. The being is here. This is what I am. This is what the I truly is, right? This is who you are. This is the awake being, the awake field. And you are this. You are always this. This is the freedom that is already free. And you are the freedom that is already free. And you can feel the truth of that. And when you feel the truth of it, there's this relaxed gorgeousness where there's a knowing, a direct knowing. There's no doubt or question because it's just simple and clear. You're this being. You're aware of the moving, changing. And this being has always been here, ever present, openness, simple and free. You don't need to qualify this with the mind. You don't need to understand, and nor can you. As soon as that starts to happen, then that will carry you away from yourself. So just let it go. Be aware of that one that can attempt to hold on to something and just let it go. Just stop. Stop and be here. Be the being. Recognize in your direct experience, does this being ever go anywhere? Can you recognize you? Can you recognize right now that who you are in truth as the being does not change or move, is always the same? Feel the resonance and the aliveness of the confirmation in the innermost being. And as the attention is looking in the being and confirming, it's almost as if it brings itself more alive, more awakeness, more clarity, more of a sense of truth, because truth is the direct experience of being yourself. Truth is being here now, just like this. Recognize the stillness, that the stillness is unmoving, that it's a presence. And perhaps you can feel the resonance or a vibrational frequency that feels like your nervous system, but it's the consciousness, it's your consciousness, your pure consciousness. Feels alive, resonating like a vibration. Where is that? Can you locate it? If it feels like you can locate it, keep following the sensation of the location and see what starts to happen. Start to notice the boundlessness, the spaciousness. Can you notice that the felt sense of being is just here now, just now? It's like immediate, just here, just now, just like this. That there's no time. There's just a sense of now, now, now. Does this being have a story? Does this being have anything to say? Just resting, just resting. And you notice the stillness, the silence. That this is the unlimited, unbounded presence of being. There's no limitation. And the felt sense of being here is completely impersonal. That you're not the person, you're not the story, that the being has no story. And yet there's a very intimate sense of being yourself here. Very intimate. Couldn't get closer. Couldn't get closer. This is the intimacy that we've always longed for. It's to know yourself, and to feel this intimacy is to feel the wholeness, to feel the sense of fulfillment that we have been longing for, this fulfillment and looking in the world of things. Here we find a sense of intimate fulfillment, just in the sense of being, that this moment feels full and beautiful, that there's happiness here, there's peace here, there's a joyful delightedness here. Not for any reason, it's completely causeless. It's just this, just as it is. That there's a feeling of nothing else is needed, just this. Now, of course, the mind can sneak in and say, Or how do I keep this? Or, well, it's all very well because I'm in satsang and now I can feel it, but what about when the challenges come? So what about when the challenges come? Does this being go anywhere? Could this being go anywhere? And if it feels like, yes, it could, where could it go? Where could this being hide? Take a good look around and find out, can this being go anywhere? Without a thought, of course. Don't let the mind sneak in and say, well, actually, yes, it could. It could sneak behind a cloud, because that's the mind's perspective. Only look as the being, as the attention. As the attention, take a look around and find out, can awareness go anywhere? Does the aware being ever go anywhere? So attention can identify with the mind, but it's to recognize, as awareness, can you be aware of how attention identifies with the mind? Can you recognize that even when attention identifies, that the being doesn't actually go anywhere or get disturbed? That the felt sense of the being is completely undisturbable, silent peace. Confirm this if it is true in the direct experience. Mm. Mm. So here is the being. Feel the peace, the simplicity. Can you see that you're not the person? You're not the story. You're not the roles that you play. Because part of the grace of being the being and resting here as the awareness is that you can be aware of the moving, changing. And how we come to really confirm being the being is that we can recognize that everything that awareness is aware of is not who you are. Anything that you can perceive that is moving and changing, you are not. And so there can be this incredible, potent possibility that if you can see it, you're the awareness of it. And this is a way to deepen into being the awareness. Are you the thought? No. So every time we question, are you the story? No. Are you the roles that you play in life? No. You see, you're aware of it all. And every time you check, that you directly check, you have to directly check with the attention looking. Because if you use the mind to give an answer that the mind thinks it knows, you're not actually shifting out of the mind, right? So there's no benefit to giving an answer that the mind thinks it knows. The whole joy of inquiry is to actually inquire and to reduce reduce the life of me to life itself, to reduce me and mine to thine, right? To reduce my story, my life, my things, my world to the simplicity of being, to refine everything into the being, and to be the alive flow of life itself, that life goes on, everything looks the same, but in the intimacy of the true knowing, true knowledge, pure knowledge, you discover yourself as one with divine wholeness, One with God. We could say this true knowledge is the knowledge of the self knowing itself, pure, intelligent knowing, consciousness conscious of itself and opening to remember its absolute pure truth, right? So all of these words, you can recognize that true knowledge, pure knowledge, it's all pointing to truth itself. The truth itself is the Veda, right? So the truth itself is this flow of the Veda. It's the flow of the truth. And this flow of the truth, we are this living Veda. We're living pure knowledge, pure intelligence, alive and free, knowing itself in constant, perpetual divine surrender into itself. And so in a way, the Veda is similar to, we hear the word Vidya. Vidya is the pure knowledge, right? Ved is the same as Vidya. It's the flow of pure truth. And this pure truth is like a field of truth, an unbounded, infinite, eternal field. And here it's where we can, in our openness, we can receive the transmission of the divine. We can receive the Shruti of the Veda, right? We can receive the transmission of the truth. It's like receiving the sacred flow of the truth that the divine is, the truth that God is. So we can open here to the flows of our own holiness, our own sacredness, our own divinity. In truth, we are the living Veda. In truth, we are living yoga, it gets spoken. We are this, we are this. We don't do it. Yoga isn't standing on your head. Yoga is being the living union, being the living intimacy, being the living presence, right? You become it in your remembering, and you come to recognize yourself as the living flow of life, the living Ved, the living pure knowledge. And the deeper that we open, we can receive the transmission. We receive finer and finer frequencies, finer and finer frequencies of this field of flowing divine intelligence. And as we open to this, we start to be able to recognize within the refined, subtle perception, the mechanics, the operating system of consciousness itself. Because when we are consciousness itself, we are the intelligence of consciousness itself. And so consciousness starts to recognize its own operating system. And we flow as this field of intelligence, ever opening to a finer frequency of refined truth. The true knowing is only the knowing of the self. So as we open to the being, we open to the knowledge, the pure, total knowledge of what we are, of what consciousness is. We open to the total knowledge, which is before any interpretation, any tradition, any lineage. It's this absolute pure truth, immaculate purity, divine wholeness, divinity, whatever words we want to use. But we are this. This is what we are. It's not reserved for the special. It's actually in letting go of the specialness and the great disease of specialitis. As we let go of specialness, we come to recognize the holy, right? We come to flow in the holy truth, the holy light frequency. So as these words come, perhaps you can feel the frequency within your own recognition coming a little more alive, a little more holy, a little more pure and divine. Cannot look for it with the mind. You can just feel it bubbling as natural effulgence within your intelligent, conscious being that you are. And the felt sense of this, we could say, could also be called the heart, the spiritual heart, the true, wide open, infinite, eternal heart that is pure, unconditional love, perfect love, right? The heart that is the love of God. And as we open, as we open in the face of all of our challenges, we could say the flow of life coming forward as challenges, seeming challenges to the mind. As we open in the face of our challenges, we're opening through the protections of the personal heart. We're opening to the infinite heart to discover the true spiritual heart, which is really the heart of God, the love of God, the perfect love, and being that. So in a way, the words of the true heart of God, the grace, the self, it's all the same. And so too here do we find the light that is the Satguru, right? We find the teacher within, the guiding light within. It's all the same. It's all the same, but it might have different feelings, and certain knowings might come online for different laws of nature first, right? According to our laws of nature, we might open to more of a sense of love and devotion first, or we might open to a sense of really clear knowing, which is like that more of that Shiva aspect, right? That pure vertical Shiva. Or we might open more to that heart flowing Shakti, the aliveness, right? And all according to the laws of nature. So we open and flower uniquely. And yet in truth, it's all the same, right? The differences, the seeming difference, even of different subtle qualities and flavor, they're only differentiated by the mind trying to measure or understand. But it's all the same. It's all the same divine wholeness. It's all the same one. And it's a constant invitation to come to a depth of oneness where the one knows no other. It doesn't even see its own reflection. Consciously collapses into itself as Brahman. And so the truth is that everything is Brahman, everything is God, everything is that in flow, in motion. But we have to come to the knowing of the being and collapse into the remembering before the illusion of separation. We have to come to know this in the being first. And as we come to know this in the being first, it shifts our perspective of seeing from seeing as the personal to seeing as the impersonal, seeing as the limited victim to seeing as the unlimited, unbounded, right? And it's really only from the unbounded perspective that we can start to refine and see through the limitation, because the residues of limitation will remain even when the perspective of seeing shifts. And we keep refining and refining and coming to a finer and purer frequency of divine knowing. And through this, we open to all the gorgeousness of the holiness, the sacredness, the purity and the beauty. And in truth, all of this, regardless of the laws of nature, in truth, all of this is about surrender. We can't escape surrender, because surrender is the natural momentum of divinity, is in this constant self-sustaining surrender into itself, it's really how the integrity of wholeness remains whole and never ever divides, is through pure devotion and surrender, right? It's through the pure humility that is divinity, right? Divinity is pure humility, and it remains in integrity, integral, whole, because its natural flow within itself is that it never ever divides. It's in perfect integrity always. It never divides because of its humility. Its natural flow within itself is surrender, is devotion, is this pure devotion. And so as we come naturally through the layers of resonance of consciousness to recognize this truth, we're initiated we're initiated into surrender naturally. We're introduced to surrender, we're introduced to devotion. And we might be of course we're introduced to surrender right on the surface of life, right off the bat. We're given the opportunity for surrender to happen. And right on the surface of life, devotion might be something that's very natural, or it might not, right? It doesn't matter, because at some point in this unfolding, we will come alive in devotion. We will come alive in the recognition that divine surrender is the only way into the divine. And really, divine surrender can start to happen as we're in the process of refinement, in the process of unity being remembered, the union, the oneness being remembered. We will start to naturally come to deeper and deeper clarity, deeper and deeper flows of clarity that will introduce us to flows of holiness and sacredness, introduce us more deeply to the absolute, unavoidable surrender and these flavors of devotion. And it comes uniquely within our unfolding, just like every flower is completely unique in its color and shape and geometry and fragrance, all the subtle details. Each flower that we are is very unique in its flowering and unfolding, its blossoming. And so there's not one size fits all. And yet all flowers are flowering in the glorious divine garden, right? In divine wholeness. It's the same essence, the same creative flow essence that is giving life to everything, right? That every flower is flowering. And we can make this reference to our knowing of flowers, especially right now, as these radiant flowers are starting to spring open in the sunshine warmth of the infinite glory, right? The bright infinite blue sky, the beaming sunshine, divine light, and the flowers start in perfect divine timing, right? Different species, varieties blossom at different times and just bring their reverent, celebratory glory forward. But it's all by governance of the one, right? Who's controlling nature, but nature herself, right? So we are the same. You, you is the same, right? So it's this same blossoming in perfect divine timing, uniquely, radiantly, being fueled in essence from the divine. And that as we come to know the being, we come to know the surrender into the being, into the divine, into the flow of life, where we let go of trying to control and understand. We let go of conceptualization and belief. We let go of protection and conditioning. And we keep meeting everything that arises that feels like challenge. And we just rest as the awareness of it. And yes, sometimes, often, in the process of refinement, there can be the need to stay very present with intense feelings that come. But the feelings of the sensation, of the unraveling, of the unconscious, the sense of division, the tightness, the tension, into the light, the old stresses coming to the light. And really, all we are ever being asked is stay present with all sensation, and don't move on the story. Don't identify with the story, and don't move in the habit of the mind to tell itself a story and divide itself, because the only misery comes in the mind when the mind divides itself, right? It cuts itself off. No one is ever cutting it off. It's never been cut off. It's pure consciousness in essence. And everything is conspiring for that pure consciousness to be remembered and lived. And the invitation is to keep remembering in the ever fresh, constant, perpetual surrender, to just be here, be aware of the story, aware of the story. And you know, when this process is really active, this is a time where a lot of sitting it can be quite necessary, because it's through being able to sit and stay completely present, vigilant and present with the mind and the sensations that are arising, that allows there to be a seeing through and not moving to the habit of distraction. And usually what will happen is that life will bring forward the circumstances that it makes this possible, because everything is conspiring, of course, to support itself. The fertile ground is being offered in the challenges of life and the struggles, seeming struggles. But the fertile ground is being offered to offer the possibility to see that the only struggle is the mind struggling with itself. The suffering is the mind suffering its own experience, its own story about what's happening. That in truth there is no suffering, and sometimes there can be ways of wanting to really question that. But in truth, there is no suffering. Suffering is optional. There's definitely sensations that arise, and there's definitely the feeling of challenge, but it's only challenging to the mind. And truly, when we see through the mind, when we come to be able to face the mind, then there is no suffering. There's just what is. There's just whatever's happening, and it starts to be seen as all being equal. It's not that we don't say, yes, that's hard, or it feels challenging, or it feels intense. That's okay, but in a way, even that is part of it is a part of the mind, or a part of the expression. But it can be like a pure mind, a pure, clear mind that can be expressing, right? Part of the lived human experience, the remnants that allow the human life to continue. allow us to be able to say, yeah, it feels hard. Yeah, that feels hard. But we get quieter and quieter, and there's less and less commentary about what's happening, and just, okay, this is here, this is what's here. It doesn't mean that part of our human experience is companionship. And part of companionship is that we do share things. And in the sharing of things, it is a quality of mind conscious. It's a quality of like this clear mind. But it's one. It can be completely one with all it is. It's not creating any separation, but it can express. And in a way, the expression comes to be more, it more comes as like a celebration and an expression of what's being seen through and what's different. So it comes almost like an expression, not, of course, with no victimhood. It comes as an expression more of, wow, this is what's changing. Wow, this is intense, and yet it's okay. So it has this kind of rootedness in truth, but it expresses also, its expression can be a kind of heralding, and that heralding is like it's being used as a vehicle to express what's possible and to join in the companionship of the human experience and honor and celebrate the fragility and vulnerability of the human experience and the conditioning as it comes to recognize, as consciousness comes to open to its true nature. So it's not wrong for expression to happen. Nothing's wrong. It's only wrong if the mind makes it wrong, because then we confirm again. Does the being make it wrong? You just told a big story about something. Is the being making that wrong? If the being isn't making it wrong and you're resting in the being, it doesn't matter what kind of reporting happens. The mind, it's the mind that says, oh, that's wrong. Or so there's a subtlety, right, to how the mind is constantly wanting to act as a policeman, and it pulls the attention away from the fullness of freedom. You can chat away. You can chat away in companionship, sharing things. If there's no second guessing, then it's just the flow of life. And the flow of life is effervescent and bubbling and dancing, right? Just like you watch like a spring bubble and blossom, just like you watch a flower shine its glory or a bird sing its song, right? Nature is expressing itself, right? And we're no different. Nature expresses itself. It likes to express itself, and it's part of the human experience is to commune, right? So it's to really be aware of how the mind can conceptualize, oh, this is the way to be holy, you have to be like this. Everyone will be very different in their holiness. But as soon as you have expectations of yourself or any other being to be a certain way, what you can be sure of is that you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be disappointed with yourself. You're going to be disappointed with the apparent others. And then you start to see, oh, well, that's all the mind, right? If you imagine that someone shouldn't behave a certain way, then you're going to be disappointed, you know? Because within our human experience, as long as there's still a body, anything is possible. Right? As long as there's a body, there's still a service happening, right? The vehicle is still functioning under divine order. So it doesn't matter how deeply we recognize this truth. The vehicle belongs to the divine. It's one with the divine. And of course, it's not the body or the personality that is who we are. It's the knowing deep in the deepest truth of who we are, that we're not the body, we're not the mind. We're not really anything of this life in truth. And yet we have the glorious possibility of being life, living itself and experiencing itself like this, loving itself like this. And as long as it has a body, it wants to enjoy, it wants to live and experience itself to the fullest. So here we are, resting in the being. Just feel into how you're feeling right now. We can move into the being and be the being, and then come to a depth of resting where we don't need to necessarily have the eyes closed and feel like tight. It's just to be relaxed, that you're resting in the being, you're absorbed in the being. Having the eyes closed can really support just dropping in. But as we're resting in the being, the eyes can be open and the absorption is here. It's to check when the eyes open, is the being still here? Is the aware being still here? We don't grasp outwards with the eyes. We don't grasp outwards. We just rest, just rest.